The morning sunlight slipped through the lace curtains like liquid gold. 4 days, settling across my wrinkled hands as I stirred sugar into my tea, laughing with Clara and Ben. The kitchen was quiet, but a quiet ache for the rhythmic like ticking of the clock above the stove. Everywhere I looked, life was returning since my husband, the lavender, sprouted again. The river calmed. His chair at the table remained empty, and yet untouched. I felt torn. I still between the peace I had found here and the memories that still pulled me back to the house I once called home. That was the morning the letter arrived. It had been months since I'd left that place. A thick cream-colored envelope sat on the doormat when I opened the door to fetch the paper. But I couldn't deny it anymore. My knees cracked as I bent down, and when I saw the handwriting, to walk those old halls and prove that I hadn't vanished. One morning a letter arrived my lips. Clara found it in the mailbox and handed it to me with raised eyebrows. From them in weeks. Looks like someone inside was a glossy invitation. My name was written in familiar, careful handwriting to Emily and David's anniversary. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Gold foil, embossed. I heard about the storm and a smiling photograph of them holding champagne glasses. We're having a family dinner next weekend Saturday evening at the Maple Ridge Banquet Hall. I know things haven't been easy, but I read the lines twice. If you'd like to come, we'd like that. I imagine David's laughter felt heavy in my hands. I must have read those words a dozen times. My grandchildren running around with cake on their cheeks. Remorse, love, I pressed the invitation to my chest. Clara watched me quietly. Robert, what will you do? Think of us? I don't know. That night, I took out the blue velvet box from the dresser. The other one with my pearl earrings and the silver brooch Robert gave me on our 30th anniversary. Door and realized I don't belong there anymore. I even took my hand to her favorite lemon cake to bring as something to fear joy. For the first time in months, the truth. The house felt alive. I wrestled with the decision. Passed with gentle anticipation. Me pacing the porch one evening. I ironed my floral dress in my hand. The same one thinking Emily about once complimented at her baby shower. He nodded. I called David twice. It's Lily's birthday. Once to confirm the time, and once just to ask if he needed me to bring for a long time. His expression answer either call, then go. But I told myself don't go looking for their approval. By Saturday afternoon, I was ready. I smiled faintly. I sat on the sofa, my purse by my side. I just listened, watching the clock crawl towards 6. And I've heard enough to know you deserve peace. I decided to call again. Wherever you find it. This Saturday Emily gray and cold. Her voice was bright, cheerful, not fancy, just the one Robert used to say made my eyes look kind. I was just about to text you. As I tied my scarf, my heart fluttered. Clara fussed at me like a mother hen. Dear. Take this pie, I was just checking what time you wanted me to arrive. And remember, there was a pause, short but sharp. Just remind them who taught David to stand on his own 2 feet. You didn't get the update. You always make me braver. That's because you already are, quickly, she said, hugging me tight. The hall has a strict Ben offered limit to drive me. You know how just these in case you change your mind, so we're just keeping it small. But I didn't. Immediate not family this time. Only. The drive felt confused. Every turn of the road brought back a memory. Family. Robert painting the porch. David chasing fireflies. Hear her breath catch. The sound of my late husband's laughter echoing through summer evenings. That awkward when rehearsed we finally laugh reached the old house, she didn't want to sound cruel. It looked smaller somehow. But the yard unkempt, David, the porch lights still flickered the same way it used to. Little get-together Ben parked and glanced at me. Want me to come in? Her words hit like my cold rain. No, I swallowed hard. This one's mine. Oh, he nodded. I see. I'll be right here. She must have sensed the door opened before I could knock. Because Grandma, she hurried to say, Lily shouted, running into my arms. You'll love I barely had time to drop the pie and before she hugged me tight. The kids will call you tomorrow. Her small warmth undid before I could reply, the line went dead. Oh, sweetheart. I sat there for a long while, my cheek to her hair, staring at the invitation in my lap. I missed you too, the gold letters seemed to Daddy said you went to help people. My eyes blurred. Did you? And smiled. I told myself yes, it was just the light. But I think they helped me more. To the empty room. Inside, the house smelled the same. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Cinnamon and dust and old David memories. Will call. But there was something different in the air. At 6:15, I turned off the lamp. David appeared in the doorway. I didn't want to see the clock anymore. His face cautious through the window, but not cold. I could see the faint orange glow David. Of evening settling for a moment, over the street. Silence stretched cars between us. Passed by, thick with their headlights cutting through the dusk. Then he stepped forward. Somewhere far off. Thank you for coming. Faint music floated through the air. Thank you for inviting me. Clinking glasses. Dinner was awkward at first. I imagined my son there, filling the silence beside his wife. My daughter-in-law, Emily, was polite but distant, and I complimented the empty chair and avoided eye contact. Sitting. David
Later
kept
that
glancing
night,
at
I
me
brewed
as if
another
unsure
cup of
what
tea.
to say.
Even though
Finally,
I knew I
after
wouldn't
the
drink
candles
it,
were blown out
the house
and the
felt
dishes
smaller
cleared,
than ever.
he spoke.
The ticking
Mom,
clock grew
I owe
louder
you an
until it felt
apology.
like a heartbeat.
The words hung in the air like
reminding
fragile
me of
glass.
everything that used
Emily
to be.
froze.
I looked
Even
at
the
the
children
photo frame
seemed to
on the
sense
mantel.
the weight of it.
David
I
as
met
a
his
boy,
eyes.
gap-toothed,
For what?
covered in mud.
For the way I
holding
treated
the kite
you.
we made
For
together.
not listening.
I'd been so
For
proud then.
His
I
voice
whispered.
cracked.
For
I
sending
raised
you
you
away.
better than this.
My throat tightened.
Tears came.
You didn't
uninvited,
send me,
David.
rolling down
I
the
left
deep
because I
lines
had
of my
to.
face.
Because
I
staying
didn't
meant
sob.
losing
It
myself.
wasn't that kind of
He
grief.
nodded slowly.
It was quiet,
I know that
heavy,
now.
the kind that sits in your
I was
chest
angry
like
at
stone.
Dad's death.
For the first
and I took it
time,
out on
I
you.
allowed myself
Tears
to
stung
admit
my
it.
eyes, but I kept
wasn't
my voice
part of their
steady.
world anymore.
Grief makes us
Around
do
midnight,
foolish things.
my phone buzzed.
I did too.
A message from
He
David.
reached across the table
Hey,
and
Mom.
took my hand.
Sorry about
I'm
tonight.
sorry, Mom.
Things got
And
a little
for the first
crazy.
time in years, I
Love
believed
you.
him.
No
Later
photo,
that evening,
no
as I
explanation,
helped
no
Lily
call.
hang her new drawings
Just
on the
words
wall,
on a screen.
Emily came into
I
the room.
stared at it
She
until the light
hesitated before
dimmed and the
speaking.
phone went black.
Joy, I
Then
wasn't
I
fair
whispered,
to you either.
You chose
I
them
looked at
over
her
me.
surprised.
It wasn't
You
angry.
were protective
it was
of your
tired.
family.
The next
I
morning,
understand,
I woke before
she
dawn.
sighed. Still,
The house was
I
still
judged you
blue
without
with
knowing
early
what
light.
you'd been through.
Something
The kids adore
inside
you,
me had shifted
and I see now.
overnight. David's
A quiet
better when
clarity.
you're around. I
That
went
made
to the
me
closet,
smile.
pulled down my
He
old
always
leather
was a
suitcase,
handful,
and set
we
it on
both
the bed.
laughed.
I started
Softly,
folding my
awkwardly,
dresses,
but it was
my
real.
sweaters,
A
my
bridge
shawl.
fragile but there.
Each fold
When
was
it was
like
time to
closing
leave,
a chapter.
Lily clung to
when
me
I
again.
came across
Can you
Robert's
come
cardigan,
stay with us again,
I pressed
Grandma?
it to my face
I brushed
and
her
breathed
cheek.
in the faint scent
Maybe
of
one
cedar
day,
and
love.
old cologne.
But Grandma's
By
got
the
a
time
garden
the
that
sun
needs her
rose,
right now.
the suitcase
She
was
frowned.
full. More
I
than
left
us.
a note on
I
the
kissed
kitchen
her
table.
forehead.
Not
David,
more.
Emily,
Just
don't
different.
worry about me.
David walked me to the
fine.
door.
Take
The
care
night
of the
was
kids.
cool, the
Love,
porch
Mom.
light flickering
Then
like
I slipped
always.
on my coat.
Do you have
locked
to go
the
back
door,
tonight?
and walked down
He
the front
asked.
steps?
Yes,
The
I
morning
said.
air was
That's
crisp.
my home now.
Leaves crunched
He looked
beneath
down.
my shoes.
I guess
as I
I just
walked to the
thought
bus
you'd come
stop.
back for good.
I didn't know
I placed a
exactly where
hand
I was
on his
going.
arm.
Only
Home
that
is
I
a
couldn't
place,
stay in
David.
that house another day.
It's where you're at peace.
Surrounded by memories
I found
and
mine,
silence.
and you've got yours.
A bus pulled up.
He nodded slowly.
Its brakes hissing
I
softly.
understand.
The driver,
Before I left,
a young
I
man
added,
with kind
"You're
eyes,
welcome to visit
helped
any
me
time.
lift my suitcase
Bring the kids.
aboard. There's
Where
plenty
to,
of
ma'am?"
lavender
he
to
asked.
pick.
He
I
smiled
hesitated,
faintly.
then said,
"We will.
Anywhere
As Ben
quiet."
drove me back
He
through the
smiled.
quiet countryside.
I think I've
I
got
looked
just
out
the
at the
route
moonlit
for you.
fields.
As the
The
bus
ache in
pulled
my
away,
chest had
I
softened.
looked out the window
Not
at the
gone,
fading
but
shape
lighter
of my
somehow.
house.
Well,
the home that had
Ben
seen
said
so
after
much
a while,
laughter. And
"Did you
now,
find
so
what
much
you needed?"
emptiness. Yes,
I didn't cry
I
this
said
time.
softly. I just
think
sat
I
back,
finally closed
hands
the door
folded on my
and
lap,
opened
and
a new
whispered.
one.
He
Maybe
smiled.
peace starts
Good.
here.
About
The
time
bus
you
rumbled
stopped
down the
standing in
narrow
hallway.
country road.
I laughed.
Its windows
a real
rattling
full
softly
laugh that
with
felt
every
like
turn.
sunshine after too
I
long
sat
in the
near
dark.
the back.
When we
Hands
reached
folded
the
in my
lodge,
lap.
Clara was
Watching the
waiting on
world
the porch,
pass by
wrapped
in
in
long
her shawl.
strokes of gray
She
and
looked
gold.
me up and down. Morning sunlight spilled
how
through
did
the
it
trees,
go?
touching
I handed her
everything
the
it
empty
met,
pie dish.
except me.
I think
There was something
we forgave
freeing
each
about
other.
sitting among
Her
strangers.
eyes softened.
Nobody
And
knew
you,
my name.
Did you
Nobody
forgive
looked
yourself?
at me with pity.
Paused, then
I was
nodded.
just another
Yes,
passenger on
I
a bus
finally
going
did.
somewhere. She
I
smiled.
didn't even know
Then
the
welcome
destination
home printed
Joy.
on the small
The words
paper
washed
ticket
over
the
me
driver
like a
had handed
blessing.
me.
That
It
night,
said,
as
Maple
I walked through
Creek
the quiet
Junction.
garden,
I
I
didn't
noticed
care
the
where
small
that was.
lavender sprout
I only
lily had
wanted
planted
distance.
before the storm.
The city
had
slowly
grown taller,
melted into
defiant,
countryside.
strong.
Shops
I knelt
gave way to
beside it
fields
and whispered,
and the hum of
"See,
traffic
we
faded
made
into the
it
whisper
through."
of wind. The moon
I
glowed
thought about
on the
how,
soil just last
and the wind
night.
rustled
My
the leaves
family
softly,
had danced
like a
beneath
lullaby.
chandeliers
And
while
for
I
the first
stared
time
at a
in
cold
years,
cup of tea.
I didn't feel
For a
torn
moment,
between
I
two
almost
worlds,
reached for my
because
phone.
I finally understood.
But what would I say?
Home isn't
Did
where
you
you
have
come
fun?
from.
Did
It's where you
anyone
are loved
notice
back
I
into
wasn't
life.
there? I slipped it deeper into my purse instead. The bus stopped at a small gas station. 15-minute break, the driver called out. I stepped outside, the air sharp with the scent of diesel and pine. A few passengers stretched their legs, some smoked by the fence. I walked toward a bench by the road, the wood warm from the morning sun. "Mind if I sit?" a voice asked. I looked up. A woman about my age stood there, clutching a tote bag with a hand-stitched patch that read, "Faith over fear." Her smile was gentle. "Please," I said, scooting over. She sat beside me with a sigh. "Name's Clara. You headed somewhere special?" I shook my head. "Just away." Her eyes softened. "Away's a good place to start sometimes." There was something about her tone, understanding not prying, that made my throat tighten. I didn't want to talk, but the words slipped out anyway. "My son and his wife had a party last night. I wasn't invited." Clara didn't react with shock or pity. She just nodded slowly, as if she already knew the kind of pain that sat behind those words. She said quietly, "People forget that mothers have hearts too." The bus horn blared, cutting through the silence. I stood gripping my suitcase handle. Before I could thank her, Clara touched my arm. "If you're not set on a destination," she said, "get off at Maple Creek. It's quiet, peaceful. A place for starting over." Something in her eyes made me believe her. When the bus reached Maple Creek, I stepped off. The station was small, just a wooden shelter beside a dirt road, surrounded by trees that stretched up like green giants. The air smelled of rain and earth. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. I walked down the lane until I found a sign that read, "Willow Rest Lodge. Vacancies." It was a tiny inn, tucked between pine trees and wildflowers. The building leaned a little, as if time had been tugging at its corners, but it had warmth, curtains in the windows, wind chimes singing above the porch. Inside, a young woman behind the desk looked up. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How long will you be staying?" I hesitated. "A few days, maybe longer." She smiled. "You can pay weekly if that's easier." That's how I ended up in room 3. Small but cozy, with a single bed, a window facing the forest, and a little writing desk that smelled faintly of lavender polish. When I unpacked, I found Robert's cardigan folded neatly on top. I laid it across the chair by the window. That evening, I made myself a cup of tea using the kettle in the corner. As I stirred, I whispered, "We're somewhere new now, Robert." The silence that answered me felt less heavy than before. Days turned into weeks. Each morning I walked down to the town square. Maple Creek wasn't much. A bakery that smelled like heaven, a small church, a thrift shop, and a diner where the owner, Ben, served the best peach cobbler I'd ever tasted. He was a big man with kind eyes and a laugh that filled the room. The first time I came in, he greeted me like an old friend. "What can I get for you, ma'am?" he asked. "Just coffee," I said. He poured it, slid it over the counter and said, "First cup's on the house. You look like someone who needs a fresh start." Smiled. "Do I?" He nodded. "You've got that look. Someone who's been carrying too much for too long." That made me laugh, soft and real. I started visiting every morning. Sometimes Ben would talk about the weather or the latest gossip. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence. It became our quiet ritual. The clink of cups, the smell of coffee, the soft hum of country music from the radio. One afternoon, Clara walked in. I almost didn't recognize her until she waved and said, "Well, look who listened to me." We hugged like old friends. She told me she lived just outside town with her daughter and helped run a small community garden. "We grow vegetables, teach kids about nature," she said. "You should come by. It keeps the heart busy." I hesitated, but she insisted, so the next morning I did. The garden was beautiful. Rows of tomatoes, herbs, sunflowers taller than me. Children laughed as they watered plants with tiny cans. The air was alive with bees and the scent of soil. Clara handed me a pair of gloves. "Start with the basil. It's easy to love something that grows quick." As I knelt down and pressed my fingers into the earth, something inside me loosened. It had been so long since I'd done something that made me feel connected. To the world, to myself. By evening, my hands were covered in dirt and my heart felt lighter than it had in months. That night, back in my little room, I sat by the window and watched the moon rise over the trees. The forest shimmered with fireflies, blinking like tiny stars. I thought about David and the children. Did they notice I was gone? Did they miss my Sunday calls, my soups, my soft reminders to wear jackets before school? Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't. But for the first time, that question didn't ache as deeply. Weeks later, Ben surprised me with a small brown envelope when I came into the diner. "It's for you," he said. Came in the mail. My heart fluttered. The handwriting was familiar. David's. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside was a short note. "Mom, I hope you're okay. We stopped by your house and it was empty. I didn't realize you'd left. Please call me." No apology. Just confusion. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my purse. Ben must have seen the change in my face because he said gently, "Sometimes it takes losing something to make folks see its worth." He nodded. "Maybe. But some lessons come too late." He poured me another cup of coffee. "Then maybe it's time to live for you now, Joy." His words lingered in the air like the scent of fresh coffee. Warm, comforting, true. That evening, I returned to the garden. The children had gone home, and the sky was painted orange and pink. I sat on the bench beneath the willow tree and watched the light fade. "Robert," I whispered, "I think I've found a little piece of peace." The wind rustled the leaves, soft as a sigh. For the first time in years, I smiled without forcing it. Morning sunlight crept across the quilt, waking me before the alarm clock ever could. It was a habit I'd carried all my life, rising early to greet the quiet hours before the world fully stirred. But these mornings in Maple Creek felt different. They didn't ache. I sat up slowly, the old springs of the bed creaking beneath me, and reached for my cardigan. Outside, mist hung low over the trees, turning the whole world into a soft watercolor. The birds were already awake, gossiping from the branches. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window and whispered, "Another day, Robert. Another chance." It had become our ritual, him and me, or the memory of him. I'd stopped talking to his photograph years ago, back when my son told me it was time to move on. But here, alone in this little town, I'd found my voice again. And I liked the sound of it. When I reached the garden that morning, Clara was already there, kneeling in the soil with her straw hat tilted low. "Morning, sunshine," she called out. "You're up early." I laughed. "Old habits. Can't seem to shake them." She stood and brushed the dirt from her gloves. "Good. We could use that energy. We're building a new plot for the school kids today." So I joined her, turning the soil, planting rows of marigolds along the edges, showing little Sarah and Michael how to tuck seeds into the dirt like tiny secrets. The children's laughter filled the air, sweet and wild. It was strange how something as simple as digging in the earth could heal wounds that ran so deep. Every seed felt like a promise, one that said life goes on even after love ends. Around noon, Ben showed up carrying a basket. "Lunch delivery," he boomed, grinning. "I figured you garden folks could use some sandwiches." The kids cheered, and even Clara wiped her forehead with relief. I smiled as he handed me a cup of lemonade. "You're spoiling us," I teased. "Just feeding my favorite customers," he said. Then, lowering his voice, "You've got color in your cheeks again, Joy. Maple Creek's working its magic." I chuckled softly. "Maybe so. Or maybe it's the people here." His eyes lingered on mine for a moment. Gentle, steady. "Then we're lucky you found your way here." For the first time since Robert passed, I felt something stir in my chest. Not romance exactly, but warmth. The kind that reminds you you're still alive. The days followed an easy rhythm after that. I spent mornings at the garden, afternoons helping Clara deliver vegetables around town, and evenings reading by the window in my little room. People in Maple Creek started greeting me by name. "Morning, Miss Joy," the postman would say. "Your pie's ready, Joy," the baker would shout when I passed. Felt good, like belonging. One evening, after closing the diner, Ben offered me a ride back to the lodge. The night was cool, the road empty. He drove slow, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the open window. You ever think about going back? He asked suddenly. I looked out at the moonlight spilling over the trees. Back where? To wherever you came from. I hesitated. Sometimes. But what would I go back to? A house full of memories and silence. He nodded. Sometimes silence teaches more than words ever could. I turned toward him. And what has silence taught you, Ben? He smiled, eyes on the road. To listen when people speak with their hearts, not their mouths. The way he said it made something inside me tremble. That familiar ache of being seen after so long. We didn't speak the rest of the way. The quiet between us wasn't heavy. It was peaceful, like the space between waves. A few days later, I was trimming the basil when Clara walked over, waving a brown envelope. This came for you, she said. Froze. My name was written across it in a shaky scrawl I recognized instantly. My granddaughter Lily. My heart leapt and sank all at once. I opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing of flowers and a few crooked words written in pink marker. Dear Grandma, Daddy says you're on vacation. I miss your pancakes. Love, Lily. There was also a note in David's handwriting. Mom, please call me. Kids keep asking. I know I hurt you. I just didn't think you'd really leave. Please come home or at least tell us where you are. I sat down on the bench, the paper trembling in my hands. For weeks I'd convinced myself that they'd moved on without me, that my absence didn't matter. But now, holding Lily's letter, all the anger I'd buried began to loosen. Are you all right? Clara asked softly. I nodded, though my throat burned. I don't know. She sat beside me, hand resting gently on my shoulder. You don't have to decide today. Sometimes healing means standing still until your heart catches up. I pressed the letter to my chest. But what if standing still means I lose them forever? She smiled sadly. Or maybe standing still is how you find yourself again. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the moonlight silvering the folds of Robert's cardigan. I thought about all the years I'd given to my family. The dinners, the late-night calls, the birthdays I never missed. And still, they had forgotten me when it mattered most. But part of me still missed them. The sound of the kids' laughter, David's old smile before life hardened it. I hated that love and pain could live side by side like that, both refusing to leave. I whispered, "What should I do, Robert?" Course there was no answer. Only the sound of wind through the trees. The next morning I walked into the diner early. Ben was wiping down the counter. He looked up and immediately saw something in my face. Rough night, he asked. I handed him the letter. It's from my granddaughter. He read it quietly, then nodded. Sweet kid. He nodded. They want me to come home. And do you want to? I hesitated. I don't know. I left to find peace, not to punish anyone. But if I go back, will it all just happen again? Ben leaned on the counter. You can't control what they do, Joy. But you can decide what kind of woman you want to be now. I met his eyes. And who's that? He smiled gently. The kind who finally puts herself first. His words sank deep, settling somewhere between my ribs. I realized then, for most of my life I'd been waiting to be chosen. By my husband, my children, my family. Always waiting for someone to see my worth. But maybe, for once, I didn't need to be chosen. Maybe I could choose myself. That evening I walked back to the garden. The children were gone, and the air smelled of rain. I took Lily's drawing from my pocket and pinned it to the small notice board beside the shed. Beneath it, I wrote a note of my own. Dear Lily, Grandma's not far. I'm just learning to grow new roots. I smiled, wiping a tear from my cheek. The wind picked up then, carrying the scent of basil and soil through the air. And for the first time I felt both loss and hope in the same breath. Two halves of the same story. The morning started like any other. A soft chill in the air, dew on the petals, the quiet rustle of life returning to the garden. I was humming to myself, trimming the lavender, when Clara came rushing down the path. "Joy!" she called, slightly out of breath. You've got a visitor." I looked up, confused. "A visitor?" Her eyes softened. "He's waiting by the front gate. Said he's family." My heart skipped. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Family. There was only one person it could be. I wiped my hands on my apron, my fingers trembling. Each step toward the gate felt heavier than the last. And there he was, David, my son. He stood with his hands shoved in his pockets, wearing that same nervous half-smile he used to have as a boy when he'd done something wrong and didn't know how to fix it. Only now, there were faint lines around his eyes and streaks of silver in his hair. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The garden noises faded away until all I could hear was the beating of my heart. "Hi, Mom," he finally said, voice low. "David." He exhaled shakily, as if he'd been holding his breath for years. "You look good." "I could say the same, but you look like you haven't slept." He laughed softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, well, chasing your runaway mother across 3 states will do that." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Instead, I crossed my arms, partly to keep from reaching for him. "What are you doing here, David?" He hesitated. "Lily's been asking for you every night. She draws you pictures. Tom keeps saying you're on vacation, but she's starting to realize that means you're not coming back." A lump rose in my throat. I didn't mean to disappear. I just needed space, he finished softly. "I know." He looked around the garden. The neat rows of vegetables, the painted signs, the laughter of children somewhere beyond the trees. "This place suits you." "It's quiet," I said. "People here see me for more than what I used to be." David nodded slowly. "I can see that." He paused, then added, "But you left without a word, Mom. No note, no call. You scared us." "I tried to talk to you," I whispered. "But you'd already decided where I belonged. A facility, you said. Like I was a burden to be managed, not a mother to be heard." He flinched. "That's not what I meant." "But that's what you said," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "You looked at me like I was some fragile thing you needed to put away. After everything, David, after losing your father, after raising you alone, you couldn't see that I still had a life left to live." His jaw tightened. "I just wanted you safe." "Safe?" I repeated bitterly. "You mean silent." For a long moment he didn't speak. He just looked down at his shoes, eyes glistening. Finally he said, "You're right. I was wrong. I didn't know how to handle it, seeing you alone after Dad. I thought if I could control everything, I wouldn't lose you too." Something inside me softened. He continued, voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom, for the words I said, for not listening, for forgetting that you're the one who taught me to stand up, not to shut down." The wind moved between us, carrying the scent of lavender and earth. I reached up, brushing a tear from my cheek. "You were always so afraid of losing me, David. But don't you see? You already had." He swallowed hard. "Then let me find you again." We sat on the bench near the pond after that, the same one where I'd first met Clara. He told me about the kids, about Lily's new obsession with baking, about how the house felt empty without me. I listened quietly, my hands folded in my lap. When he finished, he looked at me with hopeful eyes. "Will you come home?" I didn't answer right away. "I don't know if I can," I said honestly. "I'm not the same woman who left. And I don't want to go back to pretending everything's fine just to make everyone else comfortable." He nodded. "I get that. I want my kids to know their grandma." "They can," I said softly. "Maybe they can even visit. But if I go back now, David, I'll lose what I've found here." He frowned. "What have you found?" "Peace," I said simply. "And a little bit of myself." Ben came by later that afternoon, bringing us lemonade. I could tell by his cautious glance that he already knew who David was. "You must be her son," Ben said kindly, extending a hand. David shook it a bit warily. "And you must be the friend she keeps mentioning." Ben smiled. "Guilty as charged." The air between them was polite but tight, 2 men measuring each other quietly. I tried to lighten the moment. "Ben runs the diner in town. He's been feeding me since I arrived. Keeps insisting I'm too thin." David raised a brow. "He's not wrong." I rolled my eyes, though secretly I was touched. For the first time in years, my son was looking at me like he actually saw me, not as an aging parent but as a woman with her own world. When Ben left, David turned to me. "He cares about you." I looked down. "He's been kind." David studied me for a moment. "I think Dad would have liked him." That simple sentence, that quiet blessing, undid me. I reached over and took my son's hand. "I think so too." That evening, David walked me back to the lodge. The crickets sang, and the sky blushed with gold. "Mom," he said as we reached the steps, "I want you to do what makes you happy. But promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Don't disappear again. If you need space, fine. But don't vanish. Lily's heart can't take that twice." I smiled sadly. "Neither can mine." He nodded, then hesitated before pulling me into a hug. Tight, warm, trembling. I held on longer than I meant to, breathing in the faint scent of aftershave and coffee. When he pulled away, his eyes shone. "I'll bring the kids next weekend. If you'll have us." "I'd like that," I said. And I meant it. After he left, I sat on the porch long after sunset. The moon hung low over the trees, silvering everything it touched. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel torn between two worlds. I realized I could belong to both, the mother I was and the woman I'd become. A few days later, the town held its annual harvest fair. Stalls lined Main Street, laughter spilled through the air, and the smell of fresh bread mixed with cinnamon and apples. Clara and I ran a small booth selling herbs from the garden. Ben handled the grill, shouting over the music and waving whenever he saw me. And then, like sunlight breaking through clouds, I saw them. Lily and little Tom running down the street, their laughter brighter than any song. "Grandma!" Lily squealed, barreling into me. I caught her in my arms, spinning her once before pressing her close. "Oh, my darling girl," I whispered, tears spilling freely. "I missed you so much." She held up a small paper bag. "Daddy said we could help you sell flowers." David appeared behind them, smiling sheepishly. "I hope that's okay." "It's perfect," I said, my heart full. For the rest of the afternoon we worked side by side, 3 generations under the autumn sun. Lily made bouquets, lopsided ones but beautiful all the same. Tom collected coins, and David fixed a broken table leg without being asked. Every so often, Ben would pass by and wink at me, and I'd feel that quiet warmth again. When the fair ended, Lily tugged at my sleeve. "Grandma, can we come again next week?" I knelt down and brushed her hair from her eyes. "You can come as often as you like, sweetheart. This is your home too now." That night, after everyone had gone, I sat in the garden under the stars. The soil was cool beneath my hands, the air thick with the smell of basil and rain. I thought about how far I'd come, from the woman who stood by the window watching her son choose convenience over love, to the woman who could finally forgive him without losing herself. Healing, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about remembering differently. The echoes of home were still there, in laughter, in letters, in the sound of my granddaughter's voice. But now they didn't haunt me. They hummed softly, like a familiar song that finally found its ending. I looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Robert, for letting me find my way." And for the first time I felt not his absence, but his peace. The night air was still, heavy with the scent of rain-soaked earth. Everyone at the lodge had gone to sleep hours ago, but I couldn't bring myself to close my eyes. There was too much stirring inside me. Old memories, new beginnings, and a quiet ache I hadn't touched in years. I lit a single candle on the desk by the window, the same spot where I wrote to Robert once every anniversary after he died. Letters I never mailed. Letters that stayed folded in the back of my dresser drawer, yellowed with time. But tonight it felt different. Tonight I needed to write one last letter, not out of grief but out of peace. I took out my faded stationery, the one with tiny lavender sprigs printed along the border, and began. "My dearest Robert, it's been 12 years since you left me. 12 long, strange years of learning how to live with your absence like a second heartbeat. I used to think I'd never stop reaching for you in the dark, never stop listening for the sound of your footsteps on the porch. But time, I've learned, doesn't take love away, just changes its shape. Do you remember the garden we planted the year before you passed? The one behind the old oak. It's blooming again, somewhere else now. A new garden, filled with the same lavender you loved. I'm tending it still, though my hands shake sometimes. I left home, Robert. I know that might surprise you, or maybe not. You always said I'd never stay put once the house felt too quiet. And you were right. It wasn't that I stopped loving them, our David and the children. It was that I needed to love myself too. When you were here, I never doubted my place. You had this way of looking at me like I was still 20, like time didn't dare touch me. But after you were gone, the world started treating me like I was fading. Like I was a shadow of who I used to be. Even our son, bless him, started talking to me in that careful tone, as if I were fragile glass. I don't blame him. He was scared. We both were. But one day, the fear turned into something colder. He looked at me and said, "Mom, you're going to the facility whether you want to or not." I remember standing there, watching him by the dining room window. His arms crossed, his jaw set like stone. He wasn't cruel, just tired. And I didn't cry, Robert. Not one tear. I just looked at him and wondered, is this truly the son I raised? The boy who clung to my robe, the one who promised he'd take care of me when I grew old. That night after he left, I sat by the window and realized something simple and terrible. I was no longer living. I was just existing for others. So I packed my suitcase. And I walked away. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know where I was going. But I followed the sunrise. And it led me to a little town with wildflowers in every corner and people who didn't look at me like I was invisible. There I met a woman named Clara. She has your humor, sharp and unexpected. And I met Ben, who owns a small diner that smells of butter and fresh bread. He's kind in a quiet way like you were. He talks too much when he's nervous, and he pretends not to notice when I hum your favorite song while sweeping the porch. Sometimes I think you sent him. But don't worry, my love. No one could ever replace you. He doesn't fill your space. He just reminds me that love can take new forms, even after loss. Do you remember that night in the hospital, when you held my hand and told me to keep living? I didn't understand then how to do that without you. But now I do. I'm living, Robert. Not just breathing, living. I've forgiven David. It wasn't easy, but he came to find me. He looked older, heavier with guilt. When I saw his eyes, I saw yours too, that same stubborn kindness. He said he was sorry for treating me like a problem instead of a person. And for the first time I believed him. He brought the children. Lily has your dimple. Tom, your curiosity. They filled the garden with laughter again. It's strange. After all these years, I feel like the circle is closing gently, not breaking. I don't know how much longer I'll be here, but I wanted you to know that I'm not angry anymore. The loneliness I carried after you left, it doesn't ache the same way. It sits quietly beside me now, like an old friend who finally understands silence. If heaven lets you read this, then know this, my love. I kept my promise. I kept us alive, in the flowers, in our sun, in every story I tell about the way you danced with me barefoot on the kitchen floor. And maybe when it's my time I'll see you again. Maybe we'll plant another garden, where lavender never fades. Until then I'll keep living. Yours always, boy. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear smudged the ink. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my chest before tucking it into my journal. I didn't need to send it anywhere. It had already reached where it needed to go. Outside, the night hummed softly. Crickets sang. The moonlight painted the garden silver. I stepped outside barefoot, letting the cool grass kiss my toes. I walked to the edge of the garden where the lavender grew thickest, each stalk swaying like a whisper. There, I dug a small hole and buried the letter beneath the roots. "Rest there," I whispered. "He'll find you." The next morning, I woke to sunlight spilling across the room and the sound of laughter outside. Clara was shouting for Ben to slow down, and when I peeked through the curtain, I saw him teaching the children how to flip pancakes over a camp stove. David caught sight of me and waved. "Morning, Mom," he called. I smiled and waved back. It struck me then how fragile forgiveness is, how it grows not in grand gestures, but in small, everyday kindnesses. Shared breakfast, patient silence, a look that says, "I see you now." Over breakfast, Lily handed me a crumpled drawing. "This is you and Grandpa," she said proudly. I looked at the picture. 2 stick figures in a garden of purple flowers. One held a watering can. The other, a small star. "That's beautiful," I said, my throat tightening. "Thank you, my darling." He grinned. "Daddy says Grandpa's in heaven, but I think he visits sometimes, in dreams." I touched her cheek. "I think you're right." Later that day, David and I walked through the garden. He bent down, noticing the freshly turned soil where I'd buried the letter. "What's that?" he asked. "Just something I needed to let go of," I said. He nodded, not asking more. Some things I think a heart understands without words. Before he left that evening, he hugged me again, tighter this time, as if he knew I wouldn't run anymore. When the car disappeared down the road, I stood there, watching the dust settle, feeling strangely light. 4 years I'd carried guilt like a weight, for not being enough, for walking away, for failing to be the mother he wanted me to be. But now, I understood something Robert had tried to teach me long ago. Love isn't about staying still. It's about growing and letting others grow too. That night, Ben brought me a small envelope. "For you," he said with a shy grin. Inside was a single pressed lavender flower and a note. "For the woman who taught me that it's never too late to start again." I looked up at him, eyes glistening. "You remembered." He shrugged, smiling. "You're hard to forget, Joy." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind. Then I said quietly, "Ben, do you believe the people we love ever really leave us?" He looked at the stars. "I think they stay in the things we tend, the gardens, the stories, the hearts they touched." Smiled. "Then he's still here." "Always will be," he said. That night, I dreamed of Robert. He was standing in the garden, sunlight spilling across his face. His eyes bright and kind as ever. He didn't say anything. He just reached out his hand, touched my cheek and whispered, "You did good, Joy." When I woke, I wasn't sad. Felt free. The morning started with stillness. The kind of eerie calm that feels borrowed, like the world is holding its breath. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wet earth. Clouds gathered low over the hills, turning the sky a dull, bruised gray. Clara was the first to notice. "The storm's coming early this season," she said, staring out the window of the kitchen. "We'd better tie down the garden before it hits." Ben turned off the radio. Even the weatherman sounded uncertain. "Could be bad," he muttered. "The river's high already." I looked out the window and felt that familiar knot of worry. The garden, my lavender, my herbs, the vegetables we'd all grown together, stood vulnerable under that darkening sky. My hands itched to protect them, as if they were my children. "I'll help," I said. Ben frowned. "Joy, no. You should stay inside where it's safe." I fixed him with the same look I used to give David when he was being stubborn. "Ben Carter, if you think I'm sitting here while the wind takes what we built, you've lost your mind." He sighed, that deep, resigned sound that meant he knew he'd lost the argument. "Fine," he said, grabbing his coat. "But stay close." We worked for hours, the sky growing darker by the minute. Clara tied ropes across the bean trellises. Ben moved crates of tools into the shed. I covered the lavender beds with burlap, pressing each edge into the soil with trembling hands. Thunder rolled across the sky like a growl. By afternoon, the first drops began to fall. Fat, heavy and cold. Within minutes, rain poured in sheets, blurring everything beyond the garden fence. "Joy!" Ben shouted over the wind. "That's enough. Get inside." "Just one more row," he yelled back. Lightning cracked somewhere nearby, illuminating the garden in a flash of white. For a second I saw it, every bloom, every fragile leaf glistening, and I knew we'd done all we could. When Ben finally reached me, he grabbed my arm. "Time to go." We ran through the mud, the wind tearing at our clothes, until we reached the lodge. The door slammed behind us just as a gust rattled the windows. Water dripped from my hair onto the wooden floor. Clara handed me a towel. "You're soaked, you fool," she said, but her voice trembled with worry. Ben rubbed his hands through his wet hair. "That was too close." I managed a shaky smile. "It'll be fine. Gardens are stronger than they look." The storm raged through the night. From my window, I watched the world disappear beneath a curtain of rain. Branches snapped, the wind howled, and the roof groaned like an old ship in the waves. At one point, the power flickered out, leaving only candlelight. Clara brought blankets. Ben checked the doors again and again. And me. I sat by the window, whispering prayers to the rhythm of thunder. Not just for the garden, but for everyone who'd ever stood in the dark and waited for something to pass. By dawn, the storm had moved on. The world was still. The kind of still that comes after chaos, when even the birds haven't yet remembered how to sing. Ben opened the front door first. The air smelled of mud and broken things. We stepped outside and my heart sank. Half the garden was gone. The lavender beds lay flattened under fallen branches. The trellises had collapsed. The shed's door hung off its hinges. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Clara sniffed hard, shaking her head. "We'll rebuild," she said fiercely. "We always do." But I couldn't move. My knees felt weak. The garden had been my sanctuary, my proof that life could bloom again after loss. Seeing it broken like that felt like losing Robert all over again. Ben placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's not gone, Joy. Just hurt." I nodded, but my eyes filled anyway. "I know. It was the first thing that made me feel alive again." He squeezed gently. "Then we'll make it live again." That day the whole town came. Word spread quickly that the community garden had been hit the hardest. Neighbors showed up with gloves, tools, and coffee. Kids carried buckets of water. Even old Mr. Harper, who hadn't left his house in months, shuffled in with a wheelbarrow. It was chaos, but it was beautiful. David and the children arrived by noon. When Lily saw the damage, her little face crumpled. "Grandma, the flowers. They're all broken." I knelt beside her, muddy and tired but smiling softly. "They'll grow back, sweetheart. Sometimes things break so they can start again stronger." She frowned. "Like people." "Exactly," I said, brushing her hair back. "Like people." She nodded seriously, as if she understood something far bigger than her years. We worked until sunset. By then, the lavender beds were cleared, the trellises retied, and the soil turned over. It would take weeks to bloom again, but life was already returning. When we finally stopped, I looked around and felt something rise inside me, something I hadn't felt in years. Gratitude. Not for what I'd lost, but for what remained. That evening, we sat around a small fire pit behind the lodge. The sky was painted orange and pink, the storm clouds drifting away. David roasted marshmallows with the kids. Clara poured cocoa into mismatched mugs. Ben sat beside me, quiet as always, staring into the flames. "You did good today," he said finally. "We all did," I replied. "Even the garden." He smiled. "You know, I think that garden's got your stubborn streak." I laughed softly. "Maybe. We've both been through storms." He turned to look at me, eyes soft. "You really love this place, don't you?" "I do," I said. "Because it reminds me that even after everything, the loneliness, the loss, something beautiful can still grow." He nodded. "You've taught us all that." For a long moment we just sat there, watching sparks rise into the dark. And I thought about how strange and wonderful it was. How a storm that destroyed so much had somehow brought everyone closer. That night, as the fire died down, I walked to the edge of the garden alone. The moonlight fell across the wet soil, silvering the broken stems. I knelt down and pressed my hand into the dirt. It was cold but alive. "I'm still here too," I whispered. In that moment I realized something profound. The garden wasn't just a place. It was a mirror. Every seed I'd planted, every weed I'd pulled, every storm it survived, it was me. I had been torn down by life, and I had grown back. The next morning I woke early and brewed tea. David and the kids were still asleep in the guest room, their coats hanging on the chair. The smell of earth and coffee filled the air. Ben came in quietly, 2 mugs in hand. "Can't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head. "Storms have a way of staying inside you." He sat beside me, handing me one of the mugs. "You know, I think you're stronger than the storm, Joy." Smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe I just stopped being afraid of rain." He looked at me for a long moment. "That's what courage is, isn't it? Not the absence of fear, just walking through it anyway." He nodded. "And remembering to plant again when it's over." Later that day, as the sun broke through the clouds, Lily came running with a small surprise. "Grandma! Look!" In her tiny hand was a single lavender sprout, bright green, growing where the storm had torn the soil apart. My heart caught in my chest. I crouched down and touched the new life gently. "See," Lily said, smiling wide. "It's not gone. It's just starting over." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the reflection of everything I'd fought for. "Yes," I whispered. "It's just starting over." Spring returned to Maple Creek like an old friend, gentle, warm, and full of second chances. The air carried the scent of earth and lilac, and every morning the sun rose earlier, gilding the hills in gold. I stood on the porch of the lodge, watching the mist lift over the fields. The garden below had come alive again. Children running, flowers bursting, laughter drifting like music. It had been a year since I first arrived here, a lost widow with shaking hands and a heart too heavy to carry. Now I stood taller. Not because the weight had vanished, but because I had learned how to live with it, how to make peace with the pieces that broke. That morning, Clara bustled into the kitchen, full of her usual energy. "Joy, the mayor's office called again. They want you to speak at the garden festival next weekend." I nearly dropped my teacup. "Speak? No. I'm too old to be giving speeches." "Nonsense," she said, waving her hand. "You're the reason that garden even exists. You've taught half this town how to plant something worth growing." Chuckled. "I just showed them what I already knew, that good things take time and care." "Exactly," she said. "So you'll do it." I sighed, pretending to protest, though I already knew I would. Because this town, this garden, had become my home, and if they wanted to hear my story, maybe it was time to tell it. Later that day, as I trimmed the lavender bushes, Ben appeared at the gate carrying a wooden box. "Delivery for the garden queen," he said, grinning. I raised an eyebrow. "What's this?" He set it down in front of me. "Open it." Inside were small envelopes of seeds, tied with string and labeled in neat handwriting. Lavender, basil, rosemary. And one marked Lily's garden. My chest tightened. "You didn't." "She sent them," he said, smiling softly. "Your granddaughter. David and the kids visited last week. They said you'd know what to do with them." I ran my fingers over the label. The handwriting was clumsy but sweet. "Oh, my heart." Ben leaned on the fence. "You could start a little corner for them. A garden within the garden." Smiled. "Yes, I think I will." That night, I sat by the window and began writing a letter. Not to send but to keep. For myself, and for whoever might find it someday. To the one who finds this. If you are reading this, I hope you know that even when the world seems cruel, life still blooms. Sometimes we lose what we thought we couldn't live without. But what we gain, peace, strength, love, those are the things that stay. Once I thought my story ended with grief. I was wrong. It began again right here, in a garden of strangers who became family. So plant your seeds. Wait for the rain. Believe in spring. Lovejoy. I folded it neatly and tucked it inside my journal. Days passed quickly as the festival approached. The garden buzzed with activity. Decorations, stalls, children rehearsing their songs. On the morning of the festival, the sky was perfect blue. I wore my best green dress, the same one Robert had once said made me look like spring itself. As I stepped outside, Clara clasped her hands dramatically. "Look at you. If I were 10 years younger, I'd have to fight Ben for you." I laughed. "Oh, hush, woman." Ben chuckled from the truck. "She's right though, you do look beautiful." I shook my head but felt a blush rise to my cheeks. It felt good to be seen again, not as someone broken but as someone alive. By noon the park was full. Stalls lined the paths, honey jars, fresh bread, flower wreaths. The scent of lavender drifted everywhere. I stood at the small stage beside the mayor, my heart pounding like a young girl's. He cleared his throat. "This year we want to honor someone who's become the heart of our town's renewal. Miss Joy, whose kindness and wisdom brought life back to Maple Creek's gardens." Applause rose around me. Children waved. Clara clapped louder than anyone. Ben just smiled, proud and quiet. I stepped to the microphone, hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," I began, my voice soft but steady. "When I came here I was lost. I'd spent my whole life caring for others, and when they no longer needed me, I didn't know who I was anymore. But this place, this garden, reminded me that growth never ends." I paused, watching the faces in the crowd. Every flower here has a story. Some grew from broken roots. Some bloomed late. But all of them reached for the light anyway. And if they can do it, so can we. There was a hush, then a swell of clapping that seemed to wrap around me like sunlight. I smiled, tears slipping free. In that moment I knew. I hadn't just found peace. I built it. After the festival, I walked through the garden alone. The light was soft, golden. I found the new patch of soil where I planned to plant Lily's seeds. I knelt, pressing my hands into the dirt. It was warm, alive. As I worked, I thought of all the seasons I'd lived. The years of joy, sorrow, love, and loss. Each one had changed me, shaped me. And though I carried scars, I carried beauty too. When I finished planting, I whispered, "For you, Lily. So you'll always know where to find me." As evening settled, the garden emptied. Only Ben stayed behind, packing up tables. He walked over, wiping his hands on a towel. "Looks like we did it," he said. "Maple Creek officially has its heart back." Smiled. "We all did it. Together." He studied me for a moment, then asked quietly, "Do you ever regret not going back? For good?" I looked out at the hills, the fading light bathing them in pink and gold. "No," I said softly. "Because I didn't leave home. I carried it here." He nodded. "You know, Joy, sometimes I think you were sent here for all of us." Chuckled. "Maybe. Or maybe I was just lucky enough to find my way." We stood in silence for a while, the sound of crickets beginning to rise. Finally he said, "You're something else, Joy. And don't you forget it," I teased. He laughed, and so did I. But behind that laughter was warmth, friendship, and the quiet understanding that life, at last, had come full circle. Weeks later, I received another letter. This one from Lily herself. "Dear Grandma Joy. The seeds grew. Daddy says we'll visit soon. I told my teacher about your garden and how flowers are like people. They grow even when they're scared. I love you so much. Love, Lily." Tears blurred my eyes. I pressed the letter to my chest and whispered, "I love you too, my little bloom." That night, I walked out into the garden one last time before bed. The moonlight bathed everything in silver. The lavender, the basil, the tiny sprouts that had begun to peek from Lily's patch. I sat on the old bench, feeling the cool air against my skin. This was where my story began again. Not in loss, not in loneliness, but in choosing myself. I closed my eyes and smiled. If Robert could see me now, I thought, he'd probably laugh and say, "You always did know how to make something beautiful out of nothing." The wind rustled the leaves gently, as if answering back. When dawn came, it found me still sitting there, wrapped in a blanket, watching the garden wake. Birds sang. Dew shimmered. A single lavender bloom opened in the first light. Soft, purple, perfect. I reached out, touched it, and whispered, "Thank you. For every season. For every heartbreak that became healing. For the life I almost gave up on, and the one that found me instead. Because in the end, that's what life really is. Not about what we lose, but what we let grow again." And I, Grandma Joy, finally bloomed.